So as it turns out, sociologists are not the first to subject society to analysis. What could be referred to as a sociological imagination may be as old as civilization itself. Just about every complex civilization throughout history has given some thought to concepts of governing vast numbers of people, most of whom that governor doesn't know or will never meet. Think about that. Creating rules for a society of thousands will require more complex structures than would small clans or tribes. So if we're to govern a functional society, there must be some consideration toward resolving conflict, defining status, allocating wealth, a whole host of things. This then leads us to ask, how do we arrange a good and just society? What changes need to be made in our own society to make it good and just? What exactly do we mean by goodness and justice as it applies to thousands or even millions, or, as the case with China and India, billions of people? Some cultures have a richer tradition in this kind of thinking than others. In ancient Egypt, for instance, society was whatever the pharaoh, seen as a god incarnate, said it was. So, that's pretty easy. But in places like ancient Greece, where the people had a greater say in their social affairs, the thinking on this was especially fruitful.
In Athens, the great philosopher Plato offered his take on a just society in his classic The Republic. Plato proposed a society that was neither too rich nor too poor, and only large enough as can be reasonably governed, just like the city-states that dominated his time. In Plato's city, however, philosophers ruled.
Gee, how strange that ancient Greek philosophers would think that Greek philosophers were the best inclined to rule. The functions and defense of this city would be taken care of by a specialized class called the guardians. The guardians would live a communal and free-love existence in the city. They would own no property and be entirely supported by the citizens. Their educations, both men and women, would be dedicated to total dedication to the city. Plato also suggested censoring inflammatory poetry and telling people a lie about the particular metals that incorporate their being. Some people are gold, some silver, some rusty iron, I guess. All right, so maybe there are some issues with Plato.
In the 14th century, the great Muslim philosopher and statesman Ibn Khaldun wrote the Muqaddimah, in which he meticulously constructed a theory of historical change.
According to Khaldun, religious ideologies help to build social cohesion. That social cohesion then helps build dynasties. As the dynasties mature, however, the original social cohesion breaks down as people can become more complacent in their power and status. This ultimately leads to the fall of the dynasty, only to be replaced by a new dynasty that is benefiting from the social cohesion of others. Calhoun postulated one of the first historical processes, but in doing so he accomplished so much more. He was the first to explore historiography, or a systematic process of studying history. He also offered some profound sociological insights into politics, economics, urban life, and even the sociology of knowledge itself.
In the early 16th century, English scholar Sir Thomas More coined the term utopia in his novel of the same name. He describes a fictional land of utopia in which everyone is happy, living in peace in a communal society free of greed and poverty. Utopians are dedicated to a healthy mixture of reason and religious piety. Though their core religious beliefs look awfully Catholic-y, no surprise from the devoutly Catholic More, the land of utopia practiced religious tolerance. Ironically, Thomas More would some years later persecute Protestants as Henry VIII's chancellor.
Things didn't go well for Thomas. As a devout Catholic, he refused to acknowledge Henry VIII's status as head of the Church of England, as well as his marriage to Anne Boleyn. He would be beheaded, as would Anne Boleyn. During this time, Nicholas Copernicus offered his heliocentric theory that the sun, not the earth, was the center of the universe. What the heck does this have to do with sociology? Be patient, I'm getting there. His insights not only changed the way we see the universe and the non-centrality of our place in it, but was also part of a movement towards scientific thinking that was sweeping the world. He and Galileo Galilei and Sir Isaac Newton applied systematic methods and reasoning in order to understand the universe around them. It was a revolution in thinking. Previously, the universe was what the church or the religious leaders said it was, and to question their revelations was to question God himself. You don't really want to do that. I refer to this as the revolution of reason over revelation. Some philosophers, most notably the French philosophes, but also others, ushered in the Age of Enlightenment by suggesting that if the universe operated according to logical and mathematical laws that could be understood through human reason, then perhaps human beings and human societies function much the same way. And if we can figure out what these laws are, then we can establish a just society and maximize human happiness. Still waiting.
Shortly before Newton published his awesome mathematical principles of natural philosophy, English philosopher Thomas Hobbes postulated that human beings were, by their natures, greedy and violent, that human societies in the state of nature were in a constant state of warfare with every man against every man. According to Hobbes, man's existence in this state of nature was one of continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
To provide for individual safety, human beings decided to give up their dangerous freedoms in exchange for the stability provided by a strong leadership. It was the responsibility of this strong leader to lead responsibly and justly, and the obligation of the citizen to obey completely. Only in this way can human beings be protected from their own aggression. Well, that's nice.
English philosopher John Locke offered a similar interpretation in his second treatise on government. Only Locke suggested that in forming this government, citizens formed a social contract between the ruled and the ruler. According to Locke, the rulers governed by the consent of the governed and were expected to respect some basic rights of the individual, namely the right to life, liberty, and property.
Hey, that sounds familiar. By the way, Locke's suggestion of a social contract was profound, but not for slaves. Locke considered slaves to be part of the property end of that agreement. Imagine that.
French philosopher JeanJacques Rousseau, however, had a somewhat different take on this social contract. Unlike Hobbes, Rousseau believed that human beings were born good, but were corrupted by society. He begins his elaboration of the social contract by saying man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains.
Rousseau believed that the people come together to form a sovereign. The sovereign forms a government that is charged with promoting the general will. The government is charged with making laws that preserve and protect human liberty. Rousseau, however, pointed out that governments tend to usurp the power of the sovereign. To avoid this, the sovereign must come together to evaluate and perhaps replace a government that has taken on too much power. All of this new thinking on government developed at a time when European merchants were expanding wealth and becoming more powerful, challenging the status of the traditional nobility. This came to a head in the English colonies in the Americas, rebelling against their monarch and establishing a republic based on Enlightenment thinking. In France, these Enlightenment philosophers confronted an incompetent and abusive nobility during a time of drought and economic hardship. French revolutionaries overthrew their monarchy and ended the estate system, establishing their own republic based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, these changes in France gained momentum and lost control, leading to a bloody reign of terror in which thousands were beheaded, mostly peasants, and culminating in an imperial dictatorship that would itself fall.
What happened? How did these Enlightenment principles go so horribly wrong in France, but seem to work pretty well in the brand new United States? In the early 19th century, some innovative thinkers came about to add their 2 cents.
Auguste Comte was the first major thinker since Ibn Khaldun to apply a systematic, scientific process to the study of society. He coined the term sociology and looked at social forces he called statics and dynamics to explain social change.
Statics were those forces in society that tended to keep society the same, predictable and stable. Statics are important because predictability and stability make everyday life possible. Imagine if every time you woke up in the morning you had no idea what was going to happen. Instead, you have a pretty good idea that you're going to go to class, you're going to go to work, you're going to do largely the same things that you did yesterday. Dynamics are those variables that lead to social change. This is important because society must develop and evolve. He saw society as developing in 3 stages: theological stage, in which phenomena is understood in terms of supernatural elements; a transitory metaphysical stage, in which the supernatural is replaced by abstract concepts; and a final positivist stage, in which phenomena are understood through reason and scientific scrutiny. Kant believed that systematically studying human interactions would lead to the development of a more rational society. He believed that sociology was the queen of sciences, the most important of academic disciplines, and his concepts of statics and dynamics still play a role in sociology today. That being said, Comte did go completely bonkers. He abandoned his ideas of a positivist science in favor of developing some godless positivist religion of humanity in which sociologists would serve as priests. He, of course, would be the high priest. He referred to himself as a prophet, refused to read anything but his own writings, and even excommunicated his own friends and supporters. So, it happens.
Social thinker Harriet Martineau translated Comte's works into English and thus opened the door to his positivist methodology. Though she was most noted in her own time for this translation, she did do her own extensive sociological analysis in her great book, Society in America. Society in America offered some interesting insights into religion, politics, and family. Martineau explored how institutions can impact social problems. She was also a dedicated women's rights and anti-slavery activist, believing that social scientists should be actively involved in shaping society. The United States was a fascinating subject for social thinkers in the early 19th century. After all, here was a new and expanding culture encompassing a vast territory. French philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville explored the strengths and weaknesses of American democracy as not just a political enterprise, but a cultural movement. The 19th century was also seeing major transformations in the economy. European society was becoming increasingly industrialized, drawing migrants into cities that struggled to keep up with the demands of a rapidly growing population. Great wealth was being created, but largely hoarded in the hands of a few wealthy and powerful industrialists. Changes were taking place so rapidly that the understanding of how society could hold itself together under such stress and how much stress a society could take became of the utmost importance. English social theorist Herbert Spencer developed what is called the organic model of society. He compared a society to a human body with the institutions and major groups serving as organs. In this social body, all organs must function effectively in order for the society to function. Spencer also applied concepts of biological evolution to social change, eventually coining the term social Darwinism. As societies develop, those who are the best adapted will thrive, while those who cannot adapt must die to make room for others. Spencer believed that acts of charity and programs for relieving poverty may be well-intentioned, but would ultimately cause the failure of society, as the least adapted would be allowed to reproduce and curtail human progress. Not a pleasant fellow. French and German sociologist Emile Durkheim and Max Weber, more than anyone else up to this time, elevated sociology into the social sciences that we recognize today. Durkheim believed in pursuing social facts, phenomena that take place external to the individual that can be observed and measured. He applied the method he wrote about in his Rules of Sociological Method to an analysis of suicide. Often understood as a psychological phenomenon, Durkheim showed that social forces were actually better predictors of suicide. Durkheim observed that industrial society, with its rapid changes and demographic shifts, was in danger of alienating its members by creating a state of normlessness or lack of direction and structure. Durkheim referred to this state as anomie. Anomie, according to Durkheim, happens as a result of rapid social change and poorly integrated members into society. Durkheim also analyzed the divisions of labor in society and elaborated on the functions of religion and of deviance in society. Max Weber, a German sociologist, believed that the normal methods of objective study were insufficient for sociologists. The sociologist must practice what Weber referred to as Verstehen, or an insightful understanding of individual motivations. It's not good enough for me as a sociologist to observe social actors and apply my understanding of what I see. It's also important for me to understand their motivations and the meanings that they apply to their behaviors. Weber applied this Verstehen in an analysis of the effects of Protestant work ethic on the development of capitalism. In this, Weber reveals that two seemingly separate variables, religion and economics, are actually conjoined and even share a causal relationship. Weber's biggest contribution, however, was an elaboration of bureaucracy. According to Weber, industrial society was replacing traditional values and beliefs with bureaucratic rules and norms. He referred to this as the rationalization of society. Organizations were forming rules to maximize output and increase efficiency in order to function. In other words, the rules regulating our behaviors were becoming more rational and less personal. Now, rational should not be understood as a value judgment. Weber wasn't saying that this rationalization was a good thing. In many ways, for the individual, it was an alienating and dehumanizing process. For society as a whole, however, bureaucracies and rationalization was necessary for functioning. Individuals within bureaucratic institutions may be dehumanized, but they were stuck to figure out how to thrive within these bureaucratic systems. Try registering for college. Enough said. In doing so, they then perpetuate the bureaucracy. Weber referred to this as an iron cage. Now, Weber and Durkheim were sociologists, and their contributions were massive. One does not have to be a sociologist, however, to contribute to the field. One of the most important and influential theorists during this industrial 19th century was not a sociologist at all. I'm talking about philosopher and activist Karl Marx. Marx developed a system of analyzing history and society in terms of what he called dialectical materialism. In other words, history could be understood in economic terms of those who control the factors of production and those who have only their labor for exchange. In industrial societies, the bourgeoisie, or the capitalist class, controls the factors of production, the factories, farms, and workplaces. The second class is the proletariat, who must sell his labor for wages. But here's the thing. According to Marx, capitalism is inherently exploitative. The value of goods is based on the cost of the materials and the labor that goes into production. In order for the capitalist to make a profit, however, the owner must pay the laborer less than the value of his labor, thus creating what Marx referred to as a surplus value. The less the capitalist pays his employees, the more surplus value, the higher the profit. So the capitalist actually has an incentive to exploit his workers. Think about that the next time you punch in. Marx predicted that history had to develop from early civilization to feudalism to capitalism to industrialization. The pressures of industrialization, however, would lead the proletariat into a collective awareness that they are being shafted. They will develop a class consciousness and ultimately rise up in a worldwide rebellion, overthrow the capitalists, and establish a classless society in which everyone gives according to their ability and receives according to their need.
Well, okay, Karl. You're getting a bit ahead of yourself now.
Marx was among the first social theorists, however, to offer an analysis of class structure as a source of inherent conflict. Unlike other sociologists who understood society in terms of function and stability, Marx was looking at the underlying conflicts in society and who benefited from these conflicts and who suffered from these conflicts. That's an important innovation. After all, just because a society is functional does not make it just. And it's important to understand differential impacts of society on various groups within that society. Now, this is just a brief history of sociology, and we're ending that history with the 19th century. Clearly, there's more to discuss, but I wanted to give you a taste of the evolution of social thinking and how it developed into a sociological science. For our purposes, modern sociology is largely founded on the works of Durkheim, Weber, and Marx. There have been some innovations since then, and we're going to discuss all of these, but that's going to have to wait when we discuss the three perspectives later on.